Episode 138 Above Ground Podcast, Collide with Andrea Onstot.
Disclaimer. The hosts of this podcast, Timothy Patrick and Will Foley, are by no means medical professionals. However, having lived experience with mental illness themselves, they have gained useful perspectives on common mental health issues that some of us struggle to overcome on a daily basis. By sharing their stories, they hope to create connection. By creating connection, they hope to help you find your purpose. And through purpose, we can all begin to build the foundation for positive mental health. This is Above Ground Podcast.
Are you ready to lace up your boots, throw up your horns, and jump into the pit? Then let's stomp the stigmas of mental illness. It's time for Above Ground Podcast. Now, Will Foley and Timothy Patrick.
Hey, what is up, everyone? Welcome to Above Ground Podcast.
Above Ground Podcast, because you can't serve below.
Oh, you know who that is. Good morning, TPP. How we doing, buddy?
We're doing all right.
Yeah. So this morning, man, we are back on Zoom, and that means we are here for another interview, and we are joined by Andrea Onstot, and she is a therapist, and she is also a PhD candidate in social welfare. She has studied disability justice, and she is also an adjunct instructor at U Albany. Andrea, thank you so much for taking your valuable time and sharing it with us. We are so excited that you are here. Absolutely. Absolutely. So tell everyone out there who you are, what you do, and why you do it.
I have a lot of experience working with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and autism. Field I got into entirely by accident when I was like 18 years old. And I just really stuck with it because I met a lot of people that I just started to care about a lot. And in that field, you see like a lot of just chronic oppression. So like I got to this point where I was like, I got to figure out something to do about this. So that's when I applied to grad school and decided to further my education. And so like what I'm doing right now with my PhD studies is sort of like looking at the human services for that population through a disability justice lens, which includes like, in my mind, applying like the ideas of the neurodiversity movement, the MAD movement, all of these movements that sort of like can see like a human diversity of brains as a thing that includes both limits and challenges, but also like really fantastic, interesting, brilliant things worthy of preserving rather than attempting to normalize. And the way I'm doing that is like the direction I'm heading is like applying self-determination theory, or like this idea of the importance of autonomy in how human service workers work with that population. So like looking at a range of like controlling behavior by service workers versus autonomy supportive behavior by service workers, with this hope of like eventually encouraging people in a more autonomy supportive direction.
Can you actually kind of just talk a smidge just about those two that you just said and maybe the difference between the two?
Controlling behaviors versus autonomy supportive.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to. So, and it's like a little bit nuanced, right? Like what is controlling versus what is autonomy supportive, right? So, and in my field, there's a lot of controlling behaviors, and people in the neurodiversity movement have spoken out a lot about it. Like one example that they bring up a lot is the use of behaviorism, behaviorist techniques to control what are called like problematic behaviors or behaviors of concern, right? So like typically it'll be like psychologists or behavior analysts who will like see a problematic behavior in a person and implement a plan that includes like rewards or punishments in order to kind of like steer a behavior in a particular direction. And a lot of people have spoken up about how traumatic their experience with a behavior plan has been. People put into seclusion rooms, have the one thing that they like enjoy in their life stripped away. And also there's like a lot of compelling evidence that suggests that like behaviorist techniques will produce similar outcomes as autonomy supportive interventions, but with like less sense of like internalized well-being. So like an example is like grades in school. Like teachers can be controlling, like implement punishments and rewards to try and steer kids towards better grades, and they might get A's and B's. But they could also be autonomy supportive, explore like what's going on in that kid's life, and they'll still get A's and B's, but have like a better sense of internal well-being, like feel more pride about their life, you know? And so like in my field, what would be autonomy supportive is actually like pretty complicated, right? Because you have to like look at the full person, because autonomy comes from within. So it would look different for each person. And so there are ways that people might endorse, for example, like a rule or an expectation. And for one person that could feel autonomous, and for another person it could not. So the metaphor I learned to sort of like describe the way like feeling autonomous might function is the stoplight, like a traffic light. So like when you stop at a red light, you are being controlled, but most people don't find that experience as stripping them of autonomy, because internally they understand why the red light is there. It can change by the context, right? So like someone stopping at a red light in a busy intersection can endorse that red light and understand it. If they stop at a red light in the middle of the night on a country road, maybe it doesn't feel as autonomous. Maybe they're like, oh, I'm just going to run this red light because I don't understand why it's here right now. And so if you like take that sort of metaphor and apply it back to like my population and like this idea of like problematic behaviors, you would explore like, okay, like what's going on in the broader picture for this person? What's going on in terms of like them endorsing our expectations versus not? What needs, like what concrete needs does the person have that are like going unfulfilled? Really looking at creating like a more supportive environment rather than steering people in a particular direction that usually someone with authority desires.
Who makes the determination as to what autonomy is for certain individuals? Because certain individuals, in my own personal experience, I think that the system is failing in my situation, and it's failing a lot of people. But it doesn't matter who I speak to, nothing gets done. It doesn't matter whether it's doctors or the facility. And like all the things that I suggest, it like they say they do them or they don't do them. My mother has no idea what the hell's going on, but yet they still won't take autonomy away from her. Like she has full autonomy basically, and it's a nightmare. So where does the determination as to who has autonomy over themselves and can be determined whether or not, when they keep telling you she's okay, but she also can play the system? Because again, as someone who's experienced these types of mental health challenges her whole life, just like me, like you learn how to operate within your own domain, and people learn how to play it very well. How do you decide when autonomy is appropriate and when it's not? And is it ever not? Because I mean, nobody wants to feel like they don't have a choice, because there's nothing worse than that. And I understand that.
Autonomy is really frequently stripped away from people, right? And the thing that I always come back to is knowledge supported by science that autonomy supports does result in better outcomes, like pretty consistently, right? There's a tendency for people to double down on control even when it's not working. And the example I'll give is like parents, right? So like if you have like autonomy supportive parenting, and your kid has like a tough time, people will jump to be like, okay, you should start controlling this kid, right? And it doesn't happen in the reverse. Like if a parent is controlling and a kid is having a tough time, people are like, okay, you should double down on the control now. Right. And so there's this just like general societal leaning towards control as if it's the thing that makes the most sense. And I think it's internalized in absolutely everybody. Right. So like this idea that control leads to safety, I think is a sort of understanding that needs to shift.
I think that's kind of baked into the system. Wouldn't you say? Is that I think that's one maybe a reason why go that way. I guess
100.
Choose that.
Yeah, and historically deeply entrenched, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
And there are examples of alternative ways of existing, but in terms of what's available right now for us to see, it's rare. It like autonomy, like truly autonomy supportive environments are pretty rare, but when you see them, they're pretty magical. Not without struggle though. It's not like a utopia, right? There'll always be like struggle. There'll always be those moments like you're describing, Will, where like you see your mom struggling and you're like scared, right? Like you're scared and you're like, what can I do? I don't want this person to get hurt. The urge to steer comes a lot of times from like a genuine place of like love and concern. And so, but then also comes oftentimes, especially in my field, from like a paternalistic perspective where somebody assumes that they know better for a person than they know themselves. So like, I want to take your mom's example and explore it a little further, if that's okay. Like, because I see this in my field all the time where somebody's like, okay, they're playing the system, they're manipulating this worker, they're doing this particular action of non-compliance, right? And within like my understanding of like disability justice, right? Like we could reframe that as resistance, right? So like a political resistance, right?
Yes.
And like the need for autonomy springing out of the person, right? So like figuring out in a very clever way, a way to like work the system so that they can get that actual need for autonomy fulfilled with the means that they have available to them.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And she is a master. but here's the issue. I'm the one who has to pick up the fallout. Yeah, and I got to be honest with you. I don't have a good relationship with her as it is. And I have set boundaries, but I can't even get the professionals to understand that she's manipulating them. And that is, and I've watched it. I was in therapy with her at one point to go just to see how it worked out. And I watched her have them talk her down in a prescription. And now I just got a phone call this morning at 2 a.m. that they took her to the hospital this morning again. So it's like, this is a cycle. So like, I'm all for autonomy, but when you live it like year after year for your entire life, it gets exhausting. And it's like when you're asking for help and nobody seems to want to answer the one question, because there's no place for her to go. Also, there are very limited facilities. And I understand why there's very limited facilities. I've seen a lot of those videos that the peer support movement has on YouTube, because I've had all those classes, and they were deplorable places. They were horrible. And I understand that, but it's like, how do we change the level of care that people get? Because there's a big divide between public care and private care, and these private companies that come in and buy up these places, and they get more money from the government to house these people, but yet they're housing them in these horrible situations. How do we stop that? How do we fix that?
That's the problem, isn't it? Because I think that, as we're talking between these two distinctive things, I personally feel like there needs to be something in the middle. Like, you can't have all the way on one side autonomy, and then on the other side, control, there has to be something in the middle. And if obviously in a case like this, where someone can't handle the control, and if it's a safety issue, then it needs to be addressed as an individual. I think in this Western culture, we like to assume that everything is the same. Like, well, this is the way it worked for this person, so we're just going to make it a standard. And that's not the case. I think the problem is it's got to be individualized. And then you're talking more variables, which you just brought up. And then it takes more staff and more time, which is going to cost the place more money. And all they want is money, because they don't really care about the people that are in it. I mean, sure, there's a handful of people that do, but ultimately the person running the place doesn't, give two shits on who's there and how their quality of life is.
When you want someone to endorse your idea of what's good for them, right? Like Will, you gave the example of like the medication, right? I feel like it's more likely that somebody will jump on board and endorse a belief if they have like more autonomy in other areas of their life. And there's a tendency in the services for mental health populations, intellectual and developmental disability populations, to strip almost all autonomy, right? And so then the need, because autonomy is a concrete need, you see it in toddlers like immediately, like they won't. No, I'll do it, right? Right? Like and that signals it's just a concrete need of human beings, the same way we have a need to like connect with other people, right? And the same way we need like food and water, right? It's just like a basic psychological need. So if somebody isn't getting that need met, their urge to meet that need might spring up in the place that you don't want it to, right? So like you think about something like inpatient hospitalization and the way autonomy is stripped away, right? So like can't use your phone, can't wear your clothes, you have to stay in this environment and can't leave. And like which of those actions are for the safety of the person, and which of those actions are for the convenience of the staff? And then are there ways to introduce a little bit more autonomy in those environments in a way that is both safe, but maybe inconvenient for the staff? And I think that's what it boils down to. And what you were saying, Tim, is that like supporting autonomy really kind of takes a little bit more work, because you really have to get to know each individual person. So like maybe one person wouldn't be harmed by having, like maybe most people wouldn't be harmed by having their cell phone in an inpatient hospital.
Right. And I get that if you're in an establishment that has 400 residents or something, I get the whole aspect of having rules to everyone has to wear the same thing. Just I do get that.
I don't.
Maybe if there was certain individuals that could I don't know if I want to use this word, earn their autonomy, but if you can prove that you're able to handle it, then certain sections.
See, that's a perspective I really don't understand. This idea of earning autonomy. It's like, it's the same as like, why would somebody have to earn air or earn water? Like
it's a safety issue.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting back to, is like this idea that like control equals safety is an understanding that we take for granted that I think is false. And
so would you let a toddler play with knives because they want to?
No, definitely not. But here,
so what's the difference?
I'll give an example. So like one thing I've written on is like sex and IDD populations, right? And there's like a perspective from the human services that like, okay, this is a population that is like experiencing sexual abuse at rates 11 times higher than populations without intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so you've got to like make sure that they're not being abused. So we have to control how sex works, right? And so there's like all these control tactics, like making someone take a class and go through an assessment procedure before they're like allowed to have sex. And all of that above, like sort of like from just like a basic perspective, seems like it makes sense, right? Like it seems like it would lead to safer practices. But what it actually leads to is people asserting their autonomy in unsafe ways, like finding opportunistic moments to engage in sex, not earning the right to take a sex ed class, so not knowing anything. And so when they're in a sexual encounter, having unsafe practices. And then what I think is most profoundly important, not getting the experience of like understanding what yes or no means on a personal level, which I think makes them more predisposed to coercion by people who assert themselves as an authority, right? And so it's like, it's not as simple as like, would you let your toddler play with knives? It's like, okay, at what point are you going to teach your toddler the danger of a knife? Like really sit down and talk to them about like what a knife is, what it means.
I agree with
so
that.
that they can personally endorse.
Someone with severe mental illness may not understand that. That's my point. Someone with severe mental illness.
Or it might be inconvenient for the staff member to take the time to really fully explain it so that they
it could be. It could be a little of both, but at the same time, if you do have somebody that, you can explain fully, if you have a professional that can explain to somebody fully and they are not getting it, or we think they are, and then we try and comprehend, let them, converse it another way so they can comprehend it. And a week later, they're doing the same thing. Like, there's got to be, you know what I mean? Like,
it's also like,
it's not that black and white.
I will say this. I can see from Andrea your standpoint of resistance. Okay, I get it, and that is a lot of what it is. And it's been 49 years of that. So to be honest with you, you just get exhausted. And part of me is a little bit biased on my own side just because of my own self-preservation. And I totally understand that point of view because I get it. I understand that people want to feel like they have control over what they say, what they do, how they feel about themselves, how they feel about their bodies, all that stuff. I wonder if there's a way. I mean, obviously self-determination is a lot of this. So where is the level of self-determination determined that someone has that ability to, because I get it. It's hard when you watch people make unsafe choices. And choice, like I can understand where you think choice is a level of degree, but I don't think a choice of deciding to walk on a busy street when you can barely walk at all and actually having the people at the facility let you do that because that's their autonomy is actually safe. But I also understand the fact that that's where she is, and that's that's just the matter of fact. It's basically 3 hots and a cot and med management, and they don't do very good at any of it. It's hard to watch, and it's hard to fight for complete autonomy when you don't see that is also the best choice all the time. And maybe it's not and truthfully though, sometimes maybe it's just not my choice to make. And again, it's a toxic thing. So maybe I just need to remove myself completely and be like, okay, that's it.
Yeah. I think that's really what
maybe the power of 3 fucks, I guess, maybe. And I guess maybe Tim, right?
Andrea, I got a question. What do you think about viewing the autonomy in a bit of a different light and kind of, because I think a lot of the problem is, again, it's built into the system. And as you were saying before, it's our children are pretty much indoctrinated with the education system as a reward or a punishment. You know what I mean? That whole system. So if we kind of change it in that sense and look at it as you have the autonomy to think the way that you want to think and to react the way that you want to think. You have autonomy over your thoughts, and over your emotions to a degree. So that aspect of it, but maybe the other aspect of it, again, like was kind of just use the example of someone that walking in a busy highway or a busy street, because then again, if it's a safety issue, who's Are you going to blame the facility? You're going to blame the person who put the plan together? You're going to blame the actual individual aid or the professional help? So I guess the question would be what do you think about changing the view of autonomy as to more of individualistic, your thoughts and your reactions?
Autonomy is entirely individualistic, but it's also a need. It's a need. Like food is a need. Like water.
Oh yeah, I'm not
like
saying it's not. I'm with you.
Yeah,
but
but again, so it's like the casualness with which autonomy is stripped away is appalling, right? So
yeah, I get where you're coming from.
That there are moments when somebody is going to run into a busy highway when you need to strip them of their autonomy, right? Like hug them, say, I'm not going to let you run into this highway right now, right? But those moments need to be more rare than they are, right? They need to be so much more rare than they are, because it needs to be this very careful decision to strip somebody's autonomy away, versus what we have now, where it's just taken for granted that if somebody enters a service system, almost all of their autonomy will be stripped away. I think it's in terms of the perspective shift we need, it's not making me less radical about autonomy. It's making the service system more casual or more understanding of the decisions that they're making to strip almost all autonomy away from people. And if you look at somebody who's not in a service system and the way they can float around the world making mistakes without it having that impact their life in this way, where they have things they love taken away or things they enjoy taken away because they made a dumb mistake. They just make a dumb mistake and then they're like, okay, I'm going to internalize this and maybe learn from it, or maybe not, but then still play with their phone.
Yeah, I know where you're coming from. I get it. And I know that autonomy is a need, and it's hard to separate yourself when you live it as the individual on the other side. And
yeah,
and it
what I want to do here for a second is also normalize your struggle, right? So my mother-in-law is not in the mental health service system. We're in this situation right now where she's high risk for COVID, and she's just choosing not to get vaccinated. And we want to hang out with her. We want to spend time with her, but we're scared that we'll infect her with COVID. And so we just haven't been seeing her, and we just want to strangle her sometimes and say get the vaccine,
But aren't you? But you're stripping her
same boat, but she's not in the mental health.
But you're stripping her from her autonomy by not having the choice.
No, we can't force her. That's the difference, right? So,
but you're punishing her by not seeing her.
We are not punishing her. We're setting our own boundaries. So
I agree. Yeah, bullshit. She is setting a boundary. She's setting a boundary.
I'm not telling her what she can and can't do. I'm saying I can't know that I'm the person who infected you with COVID.
Right. I get it.
That's my own thing.
I'm with you. I'm with you. You set a boundary. You set a boundary. Stick to it.
If you're the professional, person at a facility like this, or you're the aide, are you going to allow this person to do something dangerous and you can stand there and expect them to do certain things, but you're not the person that's going to be blamed for that or have the guilt of that other individual, the patient, getting injured or hurt.
Yeah, well, dude, she's also a professional that has a therapy practice that sees all kinds of people. So she needs to keep protected. She needs to keep other people protected. The bullshit about this vaccination and the non-vaccination stuff has got to stop. All these arguments about whether to vaccinate or not vaccinate has got to stop, because that's the bullshit that everybody wants to separate. It's just that some people aren't going to choose, setting a boundary. Again, she set a boundary. She said, I can't see you because I don't want to infect you. I also have a practice that I have to see other people. So again,
that's totally fair. That's
a boundary.
It is, but I'm saying you're taking away, you're focusing on the vaccination aspect of it. I'm talking about the mother choosing not to get the vaccination.
Yeah, so I'm not doing it from this place of trying to punish her. I'm really not.
Okay.
And we see when I talk to my husband about it, we see our brains go that direction once in a while. And then we stop ourselves and we say, like, we have to like still, even though she's making encountering the holidays like a very challenging thing, we're not going to say we're not going to see you. We're going to do all the work of like having an uncomfortable outdoor component so that we can like still include her in the holidays, because we respect the fact, even though we don't understand it, that this decision is not one she wants to make.
Okay,
and
that's
it's
perfect.
so,
All right, that's
so
fair.
hard. That's the thing. It's so hard. It enrages me every day. But like, she's not in a situation where I have control over her, right? Someone else in a different family might have control and might be able to force their mother-in-law to get the vaccine. And
Is she willing?
mean?
Is she willing to wear a mask? Like if you guys go over and like sit in the driveway or something like that?
Yeah, we're gonna make stuff, right? We're gonna make stuff work. The thing is, like, supporting autonomy is really hard sometimes. That's like my point, right? And then who gets control over other people and who doesn't?
Right.
That's what I wanted to. That's what Will was trying to get at earlier. And again, I understand the whole thing, but I look at it as you know, as I do the same thing with validation. Like, you validate yourself or you validate this person, but at the same time, if you're invalidating, you know, your mom or somebody else, then what's it really about? You know what I mean? It's very, there's a fine line there, and it can be confusing.
I mean, look, it goes back to the old saying, man, you can't please everybody. Like, everybody's decision isn't going to please everybody. You have to do the best you can and make the best decision for yourself. Like, I mean, that's it. And like, okay, if your boundary is this, it's this, then that's, you stick to it. And yeah, I mean, it's not, if we stopped looking at punishment the way, again, there you go. You went and looked at the punishment, like right away, boom, that's where your brain triggered to, because that's what we do. Because we're we're focused on. I
was just using it as an example.
Well, right, but that's where you went to though with that. Like, it wasn't that you went to safety of her, you went to punishment of her. Like, because that's how we do.
I said both.
That is how we do.
You did, but you mentioned punishment first, and we do that. I do the same thing. Like, it's funny how we kind of pinpoint one certain side of it sometimes, because that's how we're programmed to look at it.
It's totally how we're programmed. We're subjected to it throughout our entire lives.
Yes.
Right?
And we have been from, and we will be from birth to death. Unless you change it.
Hurt people, right?
Yeah,
so like, I've been subjected to rewards and punishment my whole life. So I feel my brain go that direction when I'm in pain, right? Like, right. And like the real thing I wanted to do, Will, was just like normalize your experience with your mom, but then sort of challenge this idea, like, your mom is in a situation where like people can control her. My mother-in-law is in a situation where people can't.
Right.
Both of them are in life-threatening situations.
Right.
So like, why does one person get to have this whole host of people saying what's good or bad for her and actually have the power to like steer her in that direction versus the other?
I get what you're saying, but I think that's a matter of whether you have a legitimate, like, I mean, so is a mental illness not a legitimate condition to literally, like, I mean, to protect then? Like, I'm because I mean,
exactly
and I'm
not,
I'm not
how to protect, right? My question
is how do you protect someone? How do you protect someone?
Mental illness is a psychological condition housed in the brain, right?
Right.
So why wouldn't we go home to what the concrete psychological needs are in order to address the psychological condition? It'd be, in my mind, the same as like somebody with a medical condition going into a hospital and them not giving them like hydration, right? So like in self-determination theory, the three main needs are autonomy, belongingness, and competence, right? Like, everyone needs these, right, in order to feel good, right? Like, they need a sense of control over their own lives. They need to feel like valuable or good at something, and they need to be connected to other people, right? And so like, if you always come home to these needs while also addressing the mental health concern, right? And make sure these needs are met the same way if somebody were in a hospital environment, you'd make sure that they have like hydration, nutrition, air, right? Make sure you're like infusing these things into their experience while also addressing the mental health concern. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. Then maybe it's not as much re-looking at the individual who's in the system, but maybe it's looking at these places.
Absolutely.
But how do you start the conversation about getting things to change at the real level, like in the community level?
Absolutely. I want to like venture this idea that people like going out and independently finding the things that will like feel good and help them. The lack of people doing that is a symptom of their autonomy being stripped away consistently. Right. So like a lot of people in the mental health system, a lot of people in my system, IDDD system, will like be so chronically controlled their whole life where it's hard to then fathom like, okay, I'm going to go out and find my own thing that will help me. Because like, and I see this in therapy all the time with clients who have very controlling parents where like it becomes very, very difficult to then like even figure out what your needs and wants are, right? Because you have somebody telling you what they are constantly, even if they're wrong or right. Like,
well, right. You don't, right. You lose touch.
To, like look externally for the answer rather than like look internally. Like maybe I want to connect with other people like me. So I'm going to go to this peer support group.
Right. And you kind of like, when you don't have that, you lose sense of self. I appreciate your time so much.
I appreciate both of you.
Tim, is there anything you want to finish up?
Unless Andrea, you have something that you wanted to add.
No, what's the lightning round?
The lightning round. We got a couple of questions. We got 3 questions for you. They're not hard. They're not hard questions. I thought I sent them to you in your email, but maybe I didn't. But they're easy.
She got a little nervous. Well,
I think
I'm a little nervous.
I have a feeling you'll have answers for all of these because you've pretty much said I could kind of see this, so I think we'll be okay. Go ahead, Timmy.
First, do you have a favorite or a least favorite word?
Oh, okay. My favorite word is spellbound. It's a beautiful word.
Nice. That's a first.
You think about it like a spell, like as a binding of a book. And then you're like enraptured in the book, like as if it's magic. It's a really pretty word.
It's pretty cool.
I just envisioned that whole thing. I kind of got giddy. That was kind of neat. Wow. All right. I felt like Peter Pan. Woo.
You look like him too.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I'm about as tall.
Do you have a least favorite?
A least favorite word. I don't think I'd have to think about that one more.
Okay, that's all right.
What it's not control. What it's not control.
I use the word so often. I recognize my toxic need for the word.
That was great. Do you have a spirit animal or a favorite pet? And are you a cat, dog, or other?
I've always been like drawn to gopher or other like underground rodent communities. And and I think it's because like I love the idea that like above ground, below ground. I love the idea that like underground, there's this whole like society of like people bonding and connecting. Yeah. That's
really cool, man. That's awesome. Yeah. So is your favorite movie Caddyshack then?
No, but I think I'm okay. I think in terms of like the way that I function, I'm more skunk-like. So, and this is not a tendency that's like a positive one, and it's one I'm trying to move away from. But if you have a pet, I've heard if you have a pet skunk and you offend the skunk, like if you like punish the skunk, or like even if you like accidentally injure the skunk, like step on it, you just have to give the skunk to somebody else because the skunk will never forgive you. Like
that's true.
They hold powerful grudges. So like
no kidding.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, and
Now
I'm
you
moving
tell
away.
us.
I'm moving away from the powerful grudge component, but I think the skunk does not want to be controlled or punished. So that is like,
See, I
learn
told you
something
it's
new
all
every
about
day.
control. It's all
Yeah.
about control.
That's a good one. Good answer.
Do you have a pet or anything?
I have a dog and I have a 3-legged cat.
Wow. So you're
yeah,
you got it all the way around then. All right.
Yeah. A skunk would be nice. I've heard they're a fantastic pet.
You can domesticate them. That's what
Yeah.
I heard. You
Like
can have the
be
skunk, you
smelled
can
or
have the
whatever?
smell, or you can have the thing
The
removed, I
stink
guess.
thing taken out.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then also like you have to skunk proof your house because they're really clever. Like they can like figure out how to like open refrigerators and stuff.
Wow.
So they're like a toddler.
Yeah.
They just make a mess. They go right for the trash.
Yep.
So the last question we have is, if there was something that you could do or that you would like to see done for mental health as a whole without any kind of restraint, what would it be?
I think probably guess just less control, like strip away the control. Honestly, like, okay, having worked in the mental health system, participated in the mental health system personally, and then also seeing like the IDDD service population, I've met so many cool people that like the rest of the population doesn't have access to because of this tendency to segregate. And like I just want everyone like out in the street so that everyone can see this like amazing diversity. You know, like there are so many moments I've had where I'm like, this person's brain is so cool and so few people see it. You know, I just want everyone out in the street. And I've heard there are like countries like that, you know, where like everyone's just out. And like a professor told me about it once, like he was in some country where there's no institutional environments, and he was just like walking down the street and there was this guy driving a bed car wearing like full pajama get up and like like big pointy cap, just like driving this bed down the street. And like I want people to see more stuff like that, you know, just like how interesting the human brain can be.
Does he have to abide by the speed limits, I wonder?
Probably.
That would be cool to see for sure.
Yeah.
But I think you made a great point. I think I think for me at least, that's one of the reasons why we do this is we learn from everybody. You know what I mean? Every time we talk to somebody, we learn something new, and and hopefully it's reciprocated, and we can take that and possibly store it in our toolbox or use it somewhere. You know?
Yeah. I really appreciate the time here with both of you.
Thank you.
So thoughtful, and like this was a really fun discussion.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for being here, Andrea. It's been an absolute pleasure for the both of us. Is there anything you want to leave our listeners with before we sign off?
Take care.
All right.
Take care of yourselves. Have a good day.
Awesome. Timmy, another cool conversation, man, here on Above Ground Podcast. So until next time, be well.
Be safe.
Be
above.